Good morning. While Jesus' so-called halakha has been of general interest to New Testament scholars, giving to the poor as an integral part of that discussion has been largely neglected. Even the pioneering studies of Sanders and Myers have overlooked the manner in which giving to the poor functions in Jesus' view of the Jewish law. Yet biblical legislation, as well as the subsequent cultural developments in the Second Temple period, indicate that charity played a distinct role in observing the commandments. Moreover, the Synoptic Gospels preserve narratives which depict the giving of charity in connection with Torah observance. In fact, these discussions at times closely parallel certain halakhic discussions codified in the literature of the early rabbis, especially the Mishnah and Tosefta. Therefore, the purpose of this paper will be to explore four synoptic narratives: the ruler's question on almsgiving, Zacchaeus and the widow's mite, in light of the legal context of giving to the poor in Second Temple texts and early rabbinic literature, in order to shed light on the substratum in the Synoptic Gospels that has, to my knowledge, been heretofore unnoticed or ignored. Before continuing with an examination of the pertinent pericopes, however, a literary contextualization of charity in Second Temple and early rabbinic texts is warranted. In the Second Temple period, caring for the poor appears in both legal and non-legal contexts. Since an exhaustive treatment is beyond the time allotted, a few examples will suffice. In the Damascus document, number 1 on the handout you should have received at the registration table, 1 reads, quote, "To love each his brother as himself, to support the poor and needy and alien," and then there's a break, "and to seek each the welfare of his fellow," end quote. Elsewhere in the Damascus document, number 2 on the handout, it is ruled that a portion of each community member's wages should go to the mevaker in order for the judges to provide some support to the poor and needy. Yet charity is not limited specifically to legal contexts. In a dramatic exhortation to his son, Tobit sketches for Tobias how he should live after Tobit's death. Number 3 on the handout. "Remember the Lord our God all your days, my son, and refuse to sin or to transgress his commandments. Give alms from your possessions to all who live uprightly." While the book of Tobit is clearly not a legal text, it should be noted that Tobit's primary concern is Tobias's observance of the commandments. Further, one might argue that the continual use of the Greek imperative here might signal an effectual exposition of Tobit's own halakha. The importance of charity is taken up by other Second Temple authors as well. For example, Ben Sira, number 4 on the handout, reads, "No good will come to the man who persists in evil or to him who does not give alms." So we also read in 2 Enoch, number 5 on the handout, "Blessed is the man who does not direct his heart with malice against any man, and helps the injured and condemned, and raises the broken down, and shall do charity to the needy." The importance of caring for the poor to the developing halakhic system of the rabbis is echoed in the Tannaitic statement, number 6, "Charity and deeds of loving kindness outweigh all of the commandments in the Torah." Both the Mishnahs and Tosefta's tractate Peah are dedicated to the Levitical laws which are intended to benefit the poor. Tractate Maaser Sheni also details the tithe for the poor that is given on the 3rd and 6th year of the sabbatical cycle. Charity's importance is further tested throughout the corpus of halakhic midrashim. Sifra Devarim, number 7, to Deuteronomy 15:8 reads, "If you have given once, give again, even to 100 times, for the Torah says, for you should open your hand to him, the needy." The same is observed in the Makilta that Rabbi Ishmael to Exodus 18:13 to 27, which is number 8 on the handout, which I won't read, but you can read it on the handout. The Talmudic minor tractate Derek Eretz Zuta which has been shown to preserve Tanaitic sources, also emphasizes the significance of charity, which you can read number 9 on the handout. Pirkei Avot lists 4 traits of the person who gives charity, describing the truly pious, the chassid, as one who gives and wants others to give. The few examples referenced above are an all too brief footnote on the subject of charity in texts dating from the Second Temple to early rabbinic times. What they afford us, however, is an opportunity to literarily contextualize the concept of giving to the poor in the period of the New Testament. Undoubtedly, as far as pious virtues are concerned, caring for the poor is an integral component of late antique Jewish practice. But more importantly for our study, it is often associated with observing the commandments and is therefore a halakhic matter. To our first pericope, the ruler's question, Matthew 19:16 through 22. Turning our attention now to the Synoptic Gospels, perhaps the clearest text is the story of the rich young man preserved in all 3 Gospels. For the sake of brevity, the Matthean form appears as number 11 on the handout. The narrative begins with a question: "Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?" The ensuing conversation shares several distinct characteristics with the halakhic discussion in the Mishnah and Tosefta. Although in rabbinic discourse, the concern of the person would have likely been worded, "What good deed attains one life in the world to come?" Discussions of who can attain such a blessing are discussed in Mishnah Sanhedrin, for example, 6:2 and 10:1 through 4, and Mishnah Avot 3:11. In part, entry into the world to come is thought to be based on observance of the commandments, or as it states in Sifrei, the completely righteous person is given reward in the world to come for the commandments he did in this world. This is also how Targum Neofiti to Genesis 3:24, number 12 on the handout, envisions the world to come. Therefore, Jesus' response with the second half of the Decalogue in light of Tanaitic and Targumic tradition is not surprising. In fact, the unique Matthean statement, "If you would enter life, keep the commandments," is conceptually connected with the Targumic statement on the handout. Moreover, Jesus' response closely parallels Mishnah Peah 1:1. These are the things which man benefits from in this world, and the principle is laid up for him in the world to come. Honor father and mother, deeds of loving kindness, making peace between a man and his fellow. In a similar vein, the Tosefton parallel, number 14 on the handout, deals with transgressions rather than positive commandments that accrue principle for punishment in the next world, for idolatry, sexual morality, for murder, for slander, which is worse than all of them. The Tosefta then adds, doing good creates principle for the world to come and bears interest in this world. Drawing together the Mishnah and Tosefta along with Jesus' response indicate how close the discussions are in content, which you can see actually as number 15 on the handout. The parallel nicely illustrates those points of Jewish law that one should practice in order to have place in the world to come. Furthermore, bearing in mind that it is unlikely that a later redactor of the Gospels would have inserted a rabbinic discussion here, this triple synoptic tradition likely reflects a point of Jesus' own halakha. Additionally, in the discussion referenced above, the Mishnah and Tosefta provide a list of commandments, both negative and positive, that accrues either credit or punishment in the world to come. Interestingly, in both rabbinic texts, the final points of both lists are considered more important than the rest. For the Mishnah, this is Torah study, and for the Tosefta, slander. The manner in which the pericopes are structured in the Gospels, the manner in which the pericopes are structured in the Gospels, they depict giving to the poor as a separate and distinct point. In other words, something crucial in the words of the Matthean passage is lacking. In light of the aforementioned rabbinic text, it might then be posited that Jesus' response to what the person lacks implicitly elevates charity to the most important commandment, an opinion shared by some of the early rabbis as already mentioned. The pedagogical purpose of the narrative, at least as it has been incorporated by the evangelists, deals with the difficulties with entering the kingdom of heaven. The concept of the kingdom of heaven is not synonymous, however, with eternal life or the world to come. As noted by Flusser regarding the present kingdom of heaven, quote, "It emerges indeed out of God's might, but is realized upon earth by men," end quote. Thus, a close reading of the ruler's question pericope indicates that it may have originated as a discussion regarding appropriate halakhic/ethical observance by which the kingdom of heaven is realized on earth and by extension accrues benefit in the form of eternal life. On almsgiving, Matthew 6, 1 through 4. Matthew 6, 1 through 4, number 16 on the handout, preserves an exposition on charity and is the first of 3 ethical maxims listed in order of importance. When compared with early Jewish halakha, however, the language of this Matthean text bears some similarities to rabbinic legal discourse. First, it should be noted that a halakhic reading of Matthew 6 does not negate the ethical nature of these teachings. Jewish ethics and law are the two sides of the same coin. In fact, it should be noted and kept in view throughout this study that halakhic concerns do not develop in a vacuum, and often an interpersonal ethical concern is at the center of those matters which are emphasized. It is not surprising then that the evangelist has incorporated these texts into a larger block, Matthew 5, 17 through 48, which are an exposition of Jewish law. This Matthean section has gained a negative connotation and has been dubbed the 6 antitheses. In order to describe its contents as teachings that were intended to refute, even nullify first century Jewish legal practice. In contrast, Flusser and von der Sant have noted, quote, "Antithetical terminology does not represent a refutation, but an interpretation of the law," end quote. Thus, we suggest the evangelist has intentionally incorporated the on almsgiving pericope to the block of the text preceding, since both deal with Torah observance. As noted previously, Matthew 6, 1 through 4 bears similarities to early Jewish legal discourse. See number 16 on the handout. Number 1 reflects the primary halakhic teaching, beware of practicing your piety before men in order to be seen by them. In rabbinic discourse, one might expect the refrain, "How so?" which we don't have in the New Testament text. The manner in which a person is to give charity in secret is then expounded in Numbers 3 through 5 that you have there in the handout. Interestingly, the composition and content of Matthew shares similarities with Mishnah Avot 2:1, which you have in the handout number 17. The saying attributed to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi concerns the importance of observing even the smallest commandment in light of not knowing its reward and comparing the reward and loss of either completing or transgressing it. Such a structure for observing commandment is not unlike what is preserved in Matthew. See number 16 on the handout again. While differences remain, the parallels regarding Torah observance are clear. Furthermore, the expectation of a reward for giving charity in the Matthean text is paralleled as well in Mishnah and Tosefta Peah, where commensurate rewards are associated with observing specific commandments. In short, a brief comparison of Matthew with the appropriate rabbinic discussions in the Mishnah and Tosefta indicate that charity, while being an ethical maxim, was also a halakhic concern, a righteous obligation for those who live within God's covenant. Zacchaeus, Luke 19, 1 through 10. Several scholars have noted the edited nature of Zacchaeus' narrative, which only appears in Luke 19, 1 through 10, number 19 on your handout. Yet this editing has not been such that ascertaining possible points of origin have been lost. Zacchaeus, the tax collector, desired to have an audience with Jesus, which is thwarted by the crowds. A murmur from the crowd arises as a result of Jesus' desire to stay with Zacchaeus. Concerned with the rising clamor, Zacchaeus stands and assures Jesus of his innocence. Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. Deduced from his immediate response, Zacchaeus was primarily concerned with two transgressions. One, having failed to give to the poor, and two, falsely accusing another. Zacchaeus' willingness to pay restitution indicates that his concern is halakhic and that which made him a sinner was some form of transgression of these commandments. Yet Zacchaeus' claim to give half of his belongings to charity is a difficult proposition to clarify according to Jewish law. Half of a person's assets is far beyond the expected ratio of charity to assets expected in Jewish law. But perhaps therein lies the point. In the Tosefta, Munbaz, a Jewish convert and king of Adiabene, is depicted as giving all his treasures away for charity during years of famine in Jerusalem. When he is accused by his brothers of giving away all of his and his father's treasures, he responds that he has sought to store treasure in heaven, a refrain which is found elsewhere in post-biblical literature and the New Testament in regards to charity. On the other hand, there is some room for speculation regarding the second legal transgression that will require some form of restitution. The Greek term here, sukophanteo, to accuse falsely, appears only twice in the New Testament, both which are attested in Luke. In the Septuagint, this term is limited to 9 occurrences, the majority of which render the Hebrew ashak, to oppress. In fact, in 6 of the occasions where sukophanteo renders ashak, the Hebrew passages are dealing with the oppressed, Proverbs 22:16, for example, 28:3, Ecclesiastes 4:1. The same is true of the Dead Sea Scrolls, Damascus document 1310, number 19 on your handout. In early halakhic literature, the Hebrew verb is utilized in connection with legal biblical material from Leviticus. This material specifically deals with transgressions committed against one's neighbor, Leviticus 5:21 to 23. In the Hebrew, and in the English, it's chapter 6, 2 through 4. The one other occasion where the Greek sukophanteo appears in the Septuagint, it renders the Hebrew shin kof resh, to lie. Both the nominal and verbal forms of this term were clearly in use during the post-biblical period. Shin kof resh is sometimes utilized in reference to those legal passages that rule on dealing falsely with another. The Mekilta that Rabbi Ishmael interprets Exodus 23:7, keep far from a false charge, which utilizes shin kof resh, as a warning against those who indulge in slanderous talk. This, coupled with Jesus' closing statement, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost, may reflect early rabbinic interpretations regarding payment of restitution for somehow dealing falsely with one's neighbor. In particular, those laws surrounding Leviticus 6, 2 through 4, which you have in number 20 in your handout. In part, these legal passages deal with oppressing one's neighbor, swearing falsely, and finding what has been lost. Though there is some limitation to what can be said definitively regarding specific halakha, and precise Tanaitic parallels are lacking, the content of Zacchaeus' response to Jesus is surely halakhic. Further, Zacchaeus' two-point response reflects what he perceived to be Jesus' more critical halakhic points, namely giving charity and dealing honestly with one's neighbor. Additionally, though Jesus' reference to Zacchaeus as the son of Abraham is thought to be secondary, it may reflect contemporary interpretations of Abraham. In the Second Temple period, Abraham was viewed as a figure of heightened virtue and piety, one who observed all the commandments. Even more to the point, Abraham is described in Mishnah Avot as having a generous, that is a charitable spirit, whose disciples will inherit the world to come. Finally, the widow's mites. Mark 12, 41 through 44, Luke 21, 1 through 4. Both Luke and Mark preserve the short narrative of the widow's mites number 21 in your handout, amidst a later critique of the temple's authorities. Some scholars have read the thrust of the small pericope to be negative, suggesting that Jesus' statement is a condemnation of the system that encouraged the widow, quote unquote, to give all the living she had. Fitzmyer notes, quote, "She has been taught and encouraged by the religious leaders to donate as she does, and Jesus condemns the value system that motivates her action. In short, Jesus' comment contains words of lament, not of praise," end quote. Such an explanation, however, militates against a simple reading of the text. Before continuing, however, it must be noted that it is difficult to determine the form of the widow's gift based solely on the gospel text. It seems that the quote-unquote treasury referred to in this text is the Temples Treasury. Several scholars have attempted to suggest that the treasury here is a reference to the 13 shofar-shaped chests on the Temple Mount, which were intended for different kinds of donations. But as the Tosefta and Mishnah indicate, neither of these chests were intended for charity, nor were any of them called a treasury. Rather, in rabbinic literature, these 13 chests are referred to as shofarot, instead of the expected Hebrew term for treasury, otzar, or lishka. In his description of the temple treasury, Safrai has noted that it was made of several rooms and chambers, one of which, the Lishkat Chashayim, the chamber or treasury of secrets, was for giving charity in secret. Thus, our closest connection for the situation depicted in Luke and Mark is likely the chamber intended for charity. Furthermore, though it might initially seem odd that the person who is herself in need of charity is depicted as giving it, initial non-halakhic evidence for this practice is discussed in Tobit. If you have many possessions, make your gift from them in proportion. If few, do not be afraid to give according to what you have. It should be noted that after this exhortation, Tobit makes reference to both him and his son being poor, a situation which apparently does not dissuade Tobit from continually instructing his son to extend his hand to the poor. Moreover, the Tosefta rules that a poor person's charitable donation to either the communal fund or the soup kitchen should be readily accepted, though not forced. Thus, Second Temple and rabbinic sources indicate the poor widow's offering, if in fact charity was an accepted voluntary practice. So, the brief narrative is not intended as a critique against the temple system or its authorities for requiring such an act, as thought by Fitzmyer, but rather a practice that was considerably augmented by the poor widow going above and beyond what was expected, communicating in hyperbolic fashion the distinct halakhic ethical importance of giving charity in Jesus' teaching. As noted at the outset of this study, halakha in general has not lacked attention among scholars, but the occasions where charity is mentioned in the Gospels, though contextually halakhic, where it appears in early rabbinic literature, has not been afforded the same attention. This modest study has attempted to address this lack. A comparison of the Synoptic Gospels and Tanaitic Corpora, specifically the Mishnah and Tosefta, indicate that charity was an integral aspect of Jesus' Torah-observant pedagogy and an expected obligation to his followers. Thank you.